The world is struggling to feed itself.
A planet that once looked like it was winning the war on starvation is now heading for disaster.
There's one person dying from hunger every minute across Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. In West Africa, the region is facing its worst hunger crisis in a decade.
But when there's never been more food and there's never been more farming, how is this possible?
It's an extraordinary situation, isn't it? A world of great abundance. I mean, we have a massive surplus of food. Twice as many calories are produced that humans need to support themselves, and yet we see rising hunger once again.
Keep watching to find out what brought us here. Was it the war in Ukraine? Was it environmental destruction?
We have these three factors coming together: climate change, hunger, and conflict, kind of locking us into this vicious cycle, a kind of trap.
Or is it simply that the system is broken?
Many kids think that food comes from the fridge, right? So that is because food is available through distribution systems. What is being pressure tested here is that capacity for that system to survive.
Is the world food system about to collapse? And if so, what can we do to stop it? Find out in this edition of Business Beyond.
In recent years, the prices of some of the world's most crucial foodstuffs have risen dramatically. Dairy products, cereals, and vegetable oils are now significantly more expensive than they were even a couple of years ago.
One recent event has sent them soaring to new heights: the war in Ukraine.
We haven't been able to export around 20 million tons of agricultural commodities, which we should definitely have exported if there was no war.
The Ukrainian government says that since Russia's invasion in February of 2022, around a quarter of the land usually used for planting crops has become unfarmable.
Because some territory is partly occupied and on some territories keep military battles, and on some still are mines.
Not only that, but much of the produce that is being successfully farmed for export is being blocked from leaving the country.
A Russian blockade of Ukraine's crucial Black Sea ports means millions of tons of wheat, for example, are trapped. The EU calls Russia's actions a war crime, saying it's weaponizing the lives of the world's starving poor.
Because when Ukraine's not exporting, the world has a problem.
Together, Russia and Ukraine supply around 25% of the world's traded wheat. That's not the wheat that's produced, it's just the wheat that goes on international markets. The problem with this happening is that we actually have a very concentrated international grain trade situation where just a handful of countries actually are the ones who are exporting most of the grain that gets traded. So for example, just 7 countries plus the European Union account for almost 90% of the traded wheat on world markets. And just 4 countries account for over 80% of the traded maize on world markets. And Russia and Ukraine together account for around 60% of the world's sunflower oil. And these are all really important commodities in the food system: wheat, maize, and cooking oil.
And because Ukraine is exporting less of those things, their prices are rising. While wealthy countries can to some extent brush off the rising costs, for developing nations, it's a disaster.
Nearly half of African countries, they import more than a third of their wheat from Russia and Ukraine. And for example, Somalia sources more than 90% from those 2 countries. So the Ukraine war has actually revealed just how much low-income countries depend on the world market for the basic food supplies to feed their people. And this dependency on food imports, it's dangerous.
The Russian blockade of the Black Sea means Ukraine and its neighbours are looking for alternative ways to get Ukraine's exports to where they need to be.
We haven't stopped any export, haven't put any rejections or any restrictions on possibility to export grains from Ukraine. We do our best, as I said, to increase the volumes exported through other routes.
But replacing sea routes is not proving simple.
The ports are closed now and they have to do it by land. So you have either trains, trucks or barges. In terms of rail tracks, the complications are difference of gauge, the width of the rails. You also have the fact that the Romanian rail infrastructure is at max capacity at the moment, and it cannot take a lot more. It needs investments that cannot happen within 2-3 weeks. What we've seen as well is trains would arrive at a certain point and then they didn't have the paperwork. And so they had to wait for the paperwork, and that blocks.
The absence of Ukrainian exports is threatening to push the world over the edge into a full-blown food crisis. But that wouldn't be the case if the system wasn't already in dire straits.
Some less wealthy nations were already struggling to feed their populations because of factors well beyond their control.
Even before the Ukraine crisis, there were countries like the countries on the edge of the Sahel, Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, Niger, and a few others, but also the Horn of Africa, Kenya and Somalia and others that are suffering because of climate change.
So we see these impacts of climate change on agriculture, things like increasing temperature, more variable and more unpredictable rainfall patterns, and more intense and more frequent extreme weather events, things like flash floods or storms. And these, of course, affect crop yields. And when crop yields are affected, supply falls, and of course then prices rise. And higher prices, of course, contribute to food insecurity.
And as is so often the case with climate change, the biggest losers aren't the biggest emitters, the industrialized nations, but the countries worst equipped to weather the impact.
So this is happening all over the world, but impacts are perhaps most markedly felt in parts of Africa and Asia because of the prevalence of poorer and more agrarian economies.
In Africa here, for example, we experience droughts. We've been experiencing droughts since 2014. And recognizing that has undermined the ability of the agricultural sector to be able to provide food is something that the world needs to recognize.
Rising global temperatures have already placed less wealthy nations in Africa and Asia in a position where their citizens won't be able to withstand today's rising prices.
There's a risk that about 58 million people in Africa might go hungry, mostly because of a combination of those factors. A factor of increasing climate change, but also then increasing prices that make whatever is available outside the reach of most people.
But as well as these two major external factors, the war in Ukraine and climate change, there is one other significant threat to the global food system, and that's the system itself.
So we've got enough food being produced to feed 12 billion people, and yet we still have 800 million people going hungry. So this is not about not producing enough food. It's about access poverty.
That's right, there's more than enough food in the world to go round. The problem is, some countries find it a lot easier to get hold of it than others.
And the current food system does not do anything to address this because all incentives around production. What we don't see are policy incentives to move us towards more equitable production, more sustainable production, and also addressing these issues of how to get food to those who most need it, how to ensure that food is affordable.
Most countries were producing food and were focusing on producing food as the way of ensuring food security at country level. We then moved into a global food system where distribution of food became more important than production of food. So it didn't matter where food was produced as long as it got to your front door, right? To the extent that actually many kids think that food comes from the fridge, right? So that is because food is available through distribution systems. Now, what is being put to question here is that ability to get food irrespective of where it is produced. What is being pressure tested here is that capacity for that system to survive.
And there are those who now theorize that the global food system is showing the signs of a system that's about to fail.
The reason why chronic hunger has been rising since 2015 is that as this system becomes weaker, shocks are transmitted more easily through it. And that's a classic sign of a system approaching its tipping point, getting very close to the point of collapse.
The writer George Monbiot is among those who believe that we've seen a key global system in this state before, just prior to the 2008 financial crash.
The global food system has acquired some very similar characteristics to the global financial system. In systems theory terms, its nodes, in other words, its major operators, have become very large. On one estimate, 4 corporations control 90% of global grain trade, and the seeds, chemicals, machinery, processing, packaging, etc. as well. We've seen the behavior of those big corporations begin to synchronize. They've become linked in all sorts of obscure ways, quite similar to how the financial institutions became linked.
The 4 companies that George Monbiot is referring to are known in international circles as the ABCD companies.
They're called the ABCDs because that stands for the first letter in each of their names. So that's Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus. And these companies all date back over 100 years, some even longer.
They're basically logistics firms. They operate in many countries. They own ships, rail cars. They're getting you stuff from A to B. They don't grow any food. They're not hoarding it particularly, but they have extraordinary amount of information. And because we don't have an international kind of public grain system, they know a lot about what's happening in all the major importer exporter countries, and there's no other sort of operator that can rival that.
Any sector where there's just a handful of companies that are controlling all the business in a particular sector, it can raise concerns. It can raise concerns about potential for collusion among those firms, conspiring to raise prices, or it can raise concern about the fact that those companies are really controlling the possibilities that others have to buy and sell things, because they are the main middle operators that are moving grain. So countries that are exporting don't have a lot of choice in terms of like who's going to move their grain, and the buyers also don't have a lot of choice.
Grain isn't the only crucial food commodity controlled by just a handful of companies. There are others. And there are those who argue that these corporations are playing a major role in making food unaffordable.
You know, we all blame the food inflation for the price rise that we witness in the supermarkets. But in reality, it is not the price rise as far as food prices are concerned. It is the greed of the of the companies or the large corporations which is actually driving the prices high.
Devinder Sharma argues that corporations are taking advantage of the current situation on food markets to justify unnecessary price rises and to line their own pockets.
Nobody wants to even know that the company's profits have been plowed in to provide bonuses to the top management, and whereas the prices for the consumers are going up, and then the companies tell, oh, we are sorry, we can't do anything because the inflation rise is what is being passed on to consumers. So I think it is time to understand that how this phenomena is now coming into a clear play, and I think the international community as well as the economists need to address this question. You know, you can always blame farmers for a little rise in prices and you say, oh, it is the food inflation. But what about the greed inflation that is taking place?
Representatives of the global agricultural and food industry reject the idea that large companies are dominating the sector and to the detriment of consumers the world over.
But you also have a lot of small companies. You know, you have 2 people behind the desk, you have small, medium-sized companies, and there's a role for everyone. You know, you have those who do national trading, intra-EU trading, those who will focus on imports, so those who will focus on exports, etc. Traders are not influencing the type of production because they are all kinds of traders, all size of traders, And there are traders who are specializing in different areas.
Nevertheless, we have a global system viewed by many as already flawed that's now facing a series of shocks beyond its control. And that is what has raised fears of a catastrophic collapse of the world's food supplies.
If the food system collapses, well, we're talking about a whole other scale of effects. I mean, basically, it will mean that the rich will continue to eat and the poor just won't eat at all. The food will not go to the poor because food prices will soar. Only the rich will be able to afford it. And I mean, it's almost a sort of horror film scenario. It's dystopian.
So what needs to be done if the world is to avoid catastrophe? Well, there's a whole feast of possible solutions, so let's work through some of them. First of all, can we invent our way out of trouble?
So some really exciting new technologies which have come along just when we need them most. The biggest shift is going to be towards precision fermentation, using microbes to produce our protein and fat instead of using animals and soya and palm oil and the rest of it. Instead, you could set up a brewery outside every town. You could have local businesses using precision fermentation to brew protein and fat, which can then be turned by those local businesses into products suitable for the local market, completely autonomously.
The idea of localizing production is at the center of a lot of the possible solutions to the world's current food problems. It could, in turn, end this disparity of access between wealthy nations and less wealthy nations.
What you would do better is to have these stronger national, regional food systems, more production, but also exchange of food that would then engage in the global system and benefit from the rules, but it wouldn't be dictated to by the global rules. You would be looking for more sort of scale appropriate rules where you need them. And without inhibiting global commerce, you wouldn't allow the global commerce to overshadow the much larger amount of food that is a domestic and even a local that is being met in a local or a regional system.
As well as changing where we get our food from, we might also need to start changing what we eat.
We need to strengthen the capability of countries to feed their people. Part of this will come from diversification, like I said earlier, growing what we do well. And there are many commodities here in Africa that people can do well. That they can grow. And we need to invest in innovation that will take these commodities and give us products that we are looking for anyway in other commodities that we import. So increasing the place of cassava, the place of millet, in wheat, in bread that we use wheat for, or in other products that we use wheat for, is something that is beginning to happen, and is something that countries should double down on.
Then there's also the issue of ensuring the citizens of these countries can afford the food that is available.
So what you want to do is put money in people's hands. You want to do that you want to do that through welfare programs. COVID showed like 160 or more countries, some of the poorest countries in the world, put money in people's hands, people who'd lost their jobs, and that gave them, they found food. There's food in the system, and you want to get people to be able to access it.
And how do you put more money in more people's hands? Well, some activists are clear on the answer to that. They say it's a clear case for wealth redistribution.
At the same time, the fortunes of food billionaires have risen during the COVID pandemic, and there are now 62 new food billionaires in the world. So people in poorer countries, they spend more than twice as much of their money on food than those in rich countries. And while inflation is rising everywhere, the food price hikes are particularly devastating for low-wage workers whose health and livelihoods have already been vulnerable. One measure to address this could be that governments start implementing progressive taxation measures to tax these excessive corporate profits that were made during the pandemic.
New technology, localized trade, tackling climate change and taxing the rich are just some of the many possible solutions to rescue the world food system from the brink of collapse.
The stakes could not be higher. Millions of people's lives are at risk. The tools are there to prevent a true catastrophe. It's time for governments to use them.
And that's all for this edition of Business Beyond. If you've enjoyed it, then please do hit like and subscribe. And why not check out our playlist as well. Our recent video about the global boom in billionaires is well worth a watch. Until next time, take care.